Yes. Come on in. Come on in. Find a seat. We're so glad that you're with us today at Grace Point. Yeah, we're doing a little cozy moment. Y'all like it? Does it feel good? It feels good.
Yeah.
Y'all, we're closer to y'all. We can see you. Y'all can see each other. It's all about building community.
We're going to do a little singing today. All right? We're going to do a little congregation singing. So you're going to know some of these tunes, and we're going to help y'all out. But we'd love to hear your beautiful voices this morning.
For sure.
Can we just love one another? Can we just live and let it be? Can we have peace with each other and exist in harmony? I'm not saying erase our history. I'm not saying forget the past. All I want to do is sing this tune. Let this good thing last. Here we go.
Come on, sing it.
Said all we need is love. All we need is love. All we need is love. That's not too hard, right? All we need is love. All we need is love. All we need is love.
Y'all sound good?
Can we just stop and take a beat? Can we just breathe before we speak? Allow our words to sing the praise instead of tearing down a days. Yeah. Well, I wish that we knew how to love this world right here and now. And all I can do is sing this tune. Hope this good thing.
Here y'all go. Let's sing it together. Y'all remember it? Here we go. Hey.
Said all we need is love. All we need is love. All we need is love.
Yeah.
All we need is love. All we need is love. All we need is love. One more time, friends. Let us hear y'all. All we need is love. All we need is love. All we need is love. Said all we need is love. All we need is love. All we need is love.
Na 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 na. Na 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 na. Na 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 na. How deep is your love?
Is your love? How deep is your love? I really need to know.
Come on.
'Cause we're living in a world of fools, breaking us down when we all should let us be.
Yeah.
We belong to you. Come on,
And me. Na 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 na. Oh yeah yeah yeah. I know your eyes in the morning sun. I feel you touch me in the pouring rain. And the moment that you wander far from me, I wanna feel you in my arms again. And you come to me like a gentle breeze. Keep me warm in your love. Oh, then you softly leave. And it's me you need to show how deep is your love.
Is your love? How deep is your love? I really need
Come
to
on, sing it.
learn.
'Cause we're living in a world of fools, breaking us down.
Yeah.
And we all should let us be. We belong to you. Sing, Sadie.
I believe in you. You know the door to my very soul. You're the light in my deepest, darkest hour, yeah. You're my savior when I fall. And you may not think that I care for you when you know down deep inside I really do. And it's me you need to show.
How deep is your love?
Is your love? How deep is your love? I really need to learn.
'Cause we're living in a world of fools, breaking us down. And they all should let us be. We belong. Let's sing it again. How deep is your love?
How deep is your love? I really need to learn.
'Cause we're living in a world of fools, breaking us down.
Yeah.
And they all should let us be. We be one more time, just your voices. Oh, how deep is your love?
How deep is your love? I really need to learn. 'Cause we're living in a world of fools,
Breaking us down when they all should let us be.
we belong to you
and me.
Amen. Yeah. Woo.
That's awesome. We love that. We're so glad that you're with us at Grace Point today. It's Pride Month. Let's hear it for Pride Month. Yeah, I see some colors right here. What we'd love for y'all to do is make some friends, talk to people that you haven't. Oh, yes, I see your earrings. I love those. Talk to people that maybe you haven't introduced yourself to before, and we'll be back in a minute.
Woo. I love it. And then the shirt isn't. So.
Christine, that's you. Can you stand in the middle?
Yeah, I was going to. Yeah, yep. Good morning, good morning. I always feel like I have the worst task of having to cut off conversation, and that probably makes me wildly unpopular. Oh, thanks, Marion. I love you all. So good morning, and good morning to our friends online as well, wherever you are in the world. And it's so exciting to know that people all around the world do join us, either live or watching the recording. So my name is Christine Fruin. My pronouns are she, her. I am also a member of the Leadership Council here at Grace Point. So on behalf of Leadership Council, I also want to welcome you all here. I have a few announcements to run through this morning, and then I'm going to invite a couple people up to give you a little bit more information. So what I'm going to lead off with is our Young Adult Meetup, or YAM, is getting together to do some, I can't even demonstrate because I don't know how to do line dance. I don't know how to do it. Next Saturday, they're meeting at 6 p.m. at Category 10. You cool people must know where that's at. I don't see Christian, but I think Christian is kind of the point of contact. Or, of course, if you want to get plugged in, we have our lovely Connect booth over here. If you want to get connected with YAM or any of our groups, you can fill out the Connect card over there. Volunteers, folks, this to me, this is probably a harder ask sometimes, I think, than money. And that is giving your time. Money, for some, is an easy one, but time is hard, especially if it requires getting up a little bit earlier in the morning, especially if you have little ones or if you're someone that maybe takes a little bit of time. But this lovely space that we have here has to get put up and taken down every Sunday, and we can't do it without y'all's arms and legs and feet. So we really need some volunteers to help set up on Sunday mornings. I know some of you probably, especially if you've ever been involved with like a church plant or, kind of an independent congregation, that can sometimes be a little intimidating because your experience may have been, if I raise my hand once, my hand's up forever. And that our intention here is for that not to be the case. And the more people we get to have help, the less of a burden it is on any one person or one family. So if you would all just think of giving a little extra time, one Sunday a quarter even, it would mean so much to help make this space the welcoming, loving, comfortable, beautiful space that it is. So there is a way to sign up to volunteer to help set up chairs, and we would really, really greatly appreciate if you would consider just giving a little bit of your time, maybe just a couple times a year. It would mean so much and keep it from being a burden on any one person. The last announcement that I have is, as you all know, this is Pride Month, although I think it should be Pride Year. It should be every day. And in a moment, I'm going to have some folks come up to talk about Grace Point's activities at Pride Fest at the end of the month. But we do have merch, t-shirts, hats for you hat folks, sweatshirts, baseball tees. If you're a crop top gal, I am not. I guess it could be, but no one wants to see that. All colors, all styles. There is a link. You go on the shop. You can pick your size, your style. We have a beautiful new logo this year that says "You Are Holy." But there, I think, are also some of years past designs as well. So get on there, get your merch ordered. It'll be delivered directly to you. And the best part is the sales proceeds will be donated to different organizations in the area that serve the LGBTQIA communities here in Nashville. So to talk a little bit more about Pride, I'm going to have Eli and Tiffany come up.
Thanks. Thanks, Christine. I'm Tiffany. Pronouns are she, they. I work on staff here at Grace Point, and I'm in charge of kids through college and LGBTQ stuff. And I'm going to let Eli introduce themselves.
Hi there. I'm Eli Givens. I use they, them pronouns, and I've been in the church for a long time, honestly.
How long, though?
Since about 2015, 2016.
Yeah, so like real long, not like 2 years. Which is still long. I appreciate that. So it is Pride. We know that. Woo! we're going to keep working on that every Sunday until we get there. So one, we want to talk a little bit about what Pride is and what that means for us and what that means for us here at Grace Point. So start with, there are several ways to get involved with Pride here in Nashville. Also, we had Franklin Pride. There's Prides all over the place. Go be involved in those. That's awesome. Grace Point will physically be at the Nashville Pride. You can march in the parade, which we're going to talk about in a second, why you should do that. You can watch the parade, which is also valid. I will be doing that. You can show up at the booth. You can come hang out. You can meet people. You can do all those things. It's exciting. And there's a reason we do this. And it is beyond just the fact that we have queer people in our community. It's beyond the fact of like, we actually believe queer people belong. Like we are part of a really big historic moment every single time that we show up with Pride. So for those of you who do not know, we're gonna have a fun little history moment. It's real short, don't worry, I have a note to keep it very succinct. Okay, first off, this is not gonna be trivia. Stonewall Uprising, raise your hand if you've heard of Stonewall. Okay, good, we don't have to start there, but we are going to anyway. So here's the thing, when we talk about Pride, we have to start with what Pride is and the fact that it is a response to oppression. It is a response to a lot of really horrible things that were happening. Stonewall was not the start of this movement for liberation, and we have to remember that. People before us have done the work. People outside of Grace Point are doing the work. We get to be a part of the movement. So on that morning when the raids happened and everything broke in a community, there was a response. And that response is what we very joyfully cheer about and put rainbows on and celebrate. And not to make it like a dark, terrible thing, but there are still terrible things happening to our communities in the United States, here in Tennessee, here in Nashville. There are still groups being oppressed. There are still people who, because of their identity or their gender expression or whatever, are still not able to live into liberation. So after the clashes that happened for 6 days after Stonewall, by the way, it wasn't just a one-moment time. After the raids, for 6 days, there were clashes with the police, there were protests, and then a year later, they commemorated that moment. And that is how we ended up with our Pride marches. They were not only to remember what was going on, but it was also a moment to say, hey, we're still protesting. So there is never a point in time that Pride is celebrated, separated from a protest. And that has to be remembered. Pride is not just the joyful, let me hug you, do all those things. It is. But that is only because people protested like crazy and people are still needing to do the stuff. And so when we talk about it, we want to remember that because sometimes, especially in progressive spaces, I will say that as a staff member, as a queer person, and always being in progressive spaces, we have a tendency to only lead with love. Love is beautiful, but love is not the thing that got Stonewall to the point, like, that is not what happened. That was people saying, I'm no longer going to be compliant with oppression that's happening, and I'm going to resist it with love. And the resistance is the part that's really important. And they did that lovingly. And with everything going on around the world, one of the things that I wanted to say, just as a reminder for today, is two of the people that are really important in this Pride movement and starting all of this. Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Riviera. Those are two of the women that get kind of put on this pedestal as beautiful advocates for what Pride is and people who said, I'm going to take a stand and I'm going to lead this. If you do not know about them, Google. It's really great, and we can talk a lot more. But the reason we wanted to bring it up when we were discussing what we were going to talk about is very specifically because you have two women of color who are expressing themselves in ways that the world says no. They were part of Stonewall, which was a safe place, and then outside groups came in and destroyed that safety. And as a Latina, one of the first things I thought of was all the stuff that's happening with immigration, all the things that are happening like to our Latinx and Latin community as a whole. What has happened to the Black community was happened to every other community that has ever existed in the United States. Pride is not separate from the rest of those groups. And you cannot be an ally without also being intersectional with everything else. And for us, that is really important. So that is your this is what this is. Now, for all the nice, lovely pieces, Eli is awesome. You should talk to Eli a whole lot. Eli is going to share very briefly why you should show up as a person at Grace Point to Pride. Go for it.
Hi there. So I'm Eli. If some of y'all don't know me, I work with a bunch of organizations here, such as the Launchpad Project, which is an LGBTQ plus affirming shelter, the Tennessee Equality Project, and just a bunch of others. I kind of make my rounds here in Nashville. But yeah, pride is so important. As I've grown up in this community, this church is political, being alive is political, being in any sort of space is political. And if you're queer, that's also a miracle that you are in these spaces. And we need to be paying attention to that. Pride is not about being polite. It's not about being poised. It's not about being liked. You need to start pushing for the people in your communities and the people that you love most, and especially the people who have been fighting for you for decades, including people of color who have been fighting and fighting and fighting, and they do not get enough support for it. And also, just on a side note, school board meetings are so important to attend. Many people feel that they need to go all the way up to the Capitol to be heard or make a change, but school board meetings are more important than ever, especially with groups such as Moms for Liberty, book bans. There's a lot going on in these school board meetings, and it is incredibly important to make time in your schedule to attend these events. But there are a lot of other events. Everything is political, and it's really important for people to get involved, especially religious folks. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah, you can clap for Eli. Eli also just won a citizenship award yesterday at Franklin Pride. Yes, very impressed. And here's the thing that we want you to leave here with, whether in person or online or whatever it is. Get involved, whatever that looks like. Also, just because we are pushing the justice aspects of it does not mean we avoid the loving, kind hugs. If you are a free mom hug person, hug the people with consent who want to be hugged. Like, do that work. There are some of us, like, that's not where we're at. We want to do other things. But the thing we never want to separate from is the history and what it's rooted in, which is action and justice. And the whole thing is this intersectional protest. And that is what we get to be involved in. So when you show up with Grace Point to march in the parade, Ricky and Josh will be there with you. I will not be there because I will have to go to the booth. That's the only reason. But when you show up with them and with our staff and you get to march, like, you are part of the history of marching and protesting. If you need to stand on the side with me and cheer them on, we are standing there with support of all the people who have marched and done all these things. When you show up at the booth, you get tons of people who, honestly, at our booth, they just want to tell us their story of what the church has done. And so if you like listening to people and loving people and just saying, hey, there is a space, you don't have to throw it all out, or maybe look at it differently, or give us one more shot, or just say, here's a sticker, like, come hang out. That is what we get to do with Pride, but it's all rooted back into the thing that started all of this, which is us stepping up and saying, hey, we're not going to be compliant in this anymore. We do love people, and this is what this is going to look like. So if you're interested in that, reach out to me, and we will get involved. And we are so excited that you're here. And so now we're going to go back to Christine for other things.
Hello. Okay, so I asked for you to give time. Now I get to ask you about the other hand, the money. Whenever I do announcements, I honestly agonize over how to graciously, passionately make the case to give to Grace Point. And I always struggle with the words, and then other people will come up here over their weeks and they do such a much more eloquent job. I'm like, oh, I wish I could do that. But I think what you just even heard from Eli and Tiffany, Grace Point is involved in very, very important work, whether it is being present and involved at Pride Fest, being active in other groups in the community, doing things even for us as a community to grow. It takes time, it takes skills, it takes leadership, but it does also take funds. And we cannot continue to do all that without just a little bit from each of you. So there's different ways that you can give. You can do the old-fashioned way. You can write a check. You can give online. I believe there's a text. There's a website. There's a lovely QR code. They're here. They're over there. Just think about, where, you donate where your values are, and just think about, what other people that might be opposed to us are giving to. and what that funds. And so unfortunately, it comes kind of down to that we have to give to support to counter that activity. So give what you can. It's all appreciated. Any amount is great. I did have, if I could, just like 2 more seconds, have one more real quick thing I want to say that I meant to lead with. If we could all just thank Sadie and Ricky for their beautiful music this morning. I meant to lead with that. I was telling Sadie earlier, their joy is so infectious that I just feel like I leave it all behind when I hear them and watch them. So I just wanted to express my gratitude and give you all the opportunity to do the same. And with that, I will give it to Josh.
Thanks, Christine. Hey, everybody. I'm Josh Scott. I'm the lead pastor here. If you're here for the first time, we're thrilled to have you, whether you're in the room or online. We're going to enter into a time of communion, which we do every week. And so as we prepare for that, I want to invite you just to kind of get settled in your chair, get a little bit comfortable. And if you want to close your eyes, that's great. If you want to keep them open because sitting in a room full of people with your eyes closed feels weird, that's okay. But I want to invite you just to take a couple of breaths, just in and out. And I don't know what your week was like. I imagine when we collect people in a room like this, some of you are coming off a great week. Maybe it was up and to the right. You had so many wins, you just got tired of counting them. You're here, and we're grateful. But maybe you're also here, and this week felt really the opposite. Maybe you came in with stress and anxiety and worry and fear. Maybe it seemed like nothing could go right this week. And maybe this week has been just the tip of the iceberg. Maybe it's been this month. Maybe it's been this quarter. Maybe it's been this year so far. But regardless of where you are, regardless of what you've been experiencing, there's this one truth that you can hang on to today, and that is that you belong and that you're beloved. That your belonging is not contingent on anything other than your existence. That you have nothing to prove today, not to me, not to anyone else in this room, not to God. Your belonging is yours. And as we celebrate communion, one of the reasons we do this regularly is to take this ancient Christian ritual and to say, number one, we're a part of this thing. Even if people want to debate, we're a part of this thing. We're a part of the Jesus movement, the Jesus story. And it's also to have this reminder that in lots and lots of places, this table is fenced and it is protected and people are excluded from it. And I don't think that's the gospel. I think the gospel is you're included. And so today, if you just need to be reminded of your belonging and your belovedness, we invite you to join us for this. If you don't want to participate, that's also okay. No pressure. No one's going to look at you funny. Just do whatever you need to do today. And kids, after communion, if you want to participate, feel free. And after communion, you can go to class. But we read something every week together as sort of an invitation and a welcome to the table. Would you join me in reading this, and then we'll celebrate together? Come to this table, you who have much faith, and you who struggle with believing, you who have been here often, and you who have come for the first time, you who are at peace, and you who feel despair. We are all part of the human family, and there is a place for us here. Christ invites everyone to the table. May this bread and wine unite us all. Amen. You can celebrate when you're ready.
How deep the love of God for us, such depth we cannot measure. For God created everyone and binds us all together. Why would we walk as enemies when we are all connected? Let kindness be our remedy, and every heart accept it. Behold your struggling neighbor with weight not meant to carry. Turn not away your favor, but give the gift of sharing. And why would we walk as enemies when we are all connected? Let kindness be our remedy, and every heart accept it. Let's sing the last verse together. The love of God is so much more than what has been exampled. It has the power to transform, to rescue and dismantle. So why would we walk as enemies when we are all connected? Let kindness be our remedy, and every heart accept it. Let kindness be our remedy, and every heart accept it. Amen. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, hello again, everybody. We are in a series this summer called Grab Bag, and it's essentially just, I threw out there, what do you all want to talk about? You threw some things out, and so we've talked about all sorts of things so far. We've talked about the book of Revelation. We've talked about the Council of Nicaea. And today we're going to talk about the Hebrew Bible. And so what I'm going to do today is just start in Genesis, and we're going to go the whole way. I don't know if you have lunch plans. You don't now. Lock the door. We're going to do this together. No. But we are going to talk about the Hebrew Bible today. And I want to talk about it kind of conceptually And so about a decade ago, I taught Hebrew Bible at university for just a little bit. And it was one of my favorite things to see undergrads come in straight from their Sunday school class and sit down, because that was me a long, long time ago, and just have your complete world exploded right in front of you as they started teaching you the Hebrew Bible. And so what I want to do today, though, is take a little bit of what I would have taught in that undergrad introduction to the Hebrew Bible, just to give you a 36,000 feet. This is what we know, or this is our hunch. This is kind of what we think about where the Hebrew Bible came from, when it arrived, and why it arrived. Does that make sense? So sort of like last week, where I gave you some dates and some names so you could check them to make sure I'm not just making stuff up. Dates and names, and that may, if you're not a history person, that part may be a little, but I promise you when we get to the end, we're going to make it matter and count. Is that okay? So hang on with me through the boring part of the history, and then we'll get to something interesting at the end. And when I thought about what would frame this discussion, I thought about questions like, should Christians engage the Hebrew Bible? Because that, believe it or not, that is an actual conversation. There are lots of people, both on the conservative end of things and on the progressive end of things, who just say, we shouldn't even bother with the Hebrew Bible. That's a different God. That's a different thing. That God's cranky. Like, why in the world would we bother with the Hebrew Bible? Then let's say you think we should engage the Hebrew Bible. Is it meaningful or essential for Christians? And if it is, how should we go about trying to engage it and read it? Those are all really important questions. And I would also be a little remiss if I didn't mention that as we're talking about the Hebrew Bible today, just this weekend, one of the greatest Hebrew Bible scholars of our time, a guy named Walter Brueggemann. How many of you have heard of Walter Brueggemann? The Prophetic Imagination. He's written some incredible commentaries. Some great stuff on the historical David. He passed away this weekend. And so you don't usually dedicate sermons, but this one's for Walter and for all the goodness and all that he taught. And surely what I'm about to share with you is stuff I learned partly from him and that shaped my understanding of this. So let's begin by talking about the name of this collection of texts we're talking about. So there are several different names. We're going to put them on the screen. There's for Jewish folks, they would call this the Tanakh. And Tanakh is based on really the A's and the H are not so important. That's for pronunciation generally. But the T, N, K are what is essential. And it's sort of an acronym. So the T, N, K, there are 3 parts to the Hebrew Bible, and Tanakh represents those. So first is the Torah. Those are the first 5 books. Torah means, people often say it means law, but it actually means teaching. So there's the Torah, the first 5 books. Then there's the Nevi'im, which is the Hebrew word for prophets. So you have Torah, teaching. You have Nevi'im, prophets. And then the third section is called the Ketuvim, and that's the writings. And so you have T, N, K. Now, before the time of Jesus, they translated the Hebrew scriptures from Hebrew into Greek, and that's known as the Septuagint. If you hear somebody talk about the Septuagint, they're talking about the Greek translation of the Hebrew scriptures. That's also called the LXX. For those of you who are just get really energized by Roman numerals, this is for you. And that's the Roman numeral. Anybody want to guess what Roman numeral that is? 70. And it refers to the 70 translators of this particular translation. Christians often call it the Old Testament. And I used to call it that. I no longer call it that because often that is used for, even accidentally, it can be used to propagate supersessionism. Do you know what that word means? Supersession is the idea that now that Christianity is here, Judaism is not really that important, and that we have superseded Judaism. That now that religion is old and tired and dated, and we've got the new thing that's actually right. And I want to avoid that at all costs because I think actually if we'd have stayed closer to our Jewish siblings, we'd have had a better Christian faith. And I still believe that's true. And so we're gonna talk about what we call the New Testament next week. But the Christians often use this. I just try to avoid it. And then in the academy and like universities and those sorts of things, they use the phrase Hebrew Bible. That's what I prefer. People do like to point out as a gotcha that there's some Aramaic in there too. But it's so negligible that you wouldn't call it the Hebrew Aramaic Bible. It's a couple verses, a couple chapters. It's essentially a few words and then a couple whole sections and chapters of Daniel and the book of Ezra are in Aramaic. So the Hebrew Bible is essentially a political and theological history. Now, I'm not doing air quotes to be disrespectful. I'm doing air quotes because I think it's really important for us to understand that what we mean by the word history is not what they meant or we mean when we talk about the Hebrew Bible as history. When we think about history, we think about like the no spin zone, right? Which is, come on. We think about just fact-based reporting, right? Don't spin it, don't interpret it, just tell me what happened. When we read a history, by the way, nobody can do that. Can we just acknowledge that there's always a little bit of spin because we're humans and we're interpreting it as we share it. But this idea that the Hebrew Bible is that it's just facts and concrete history that if you dig it up, you'll find at this time, at this place, this exact thing happened. That's not the kind of history the Hebrew Bible is. It's a creative history, and it's written in order to do some specific things. And by the way, these specific things. Today is the day of Pentecost, and I almost spoke in tongues. We were really close there. It's not really designed to even teach correct theology. That's not the point of the Hebrew Bible. It's not to give us, here are the bullet points and facts you need to know theologically. That's just not what the Hebrew Bible is actually doing. Now, this entire canon we would call the Hebrew Bible, it spans essentially 3 different eras. There's the pre-monarchical era, which is before they had a monarchy, before there was a king in Israel or Judah. This would have been that era, the era of when the Exodus was set, the era of Judges, those sorts of things. From whenever their people began to around the year 1000, then you have the monarchical era, which is from 1000 to 587, and then they were defeated in 587, and you have the post-monarchical, which is exile, return, and rebuilding. So there's this sort of, and there are some books that kind of incorporate, like the book of Isaiah, for example. When you look at Isaiah, it's actually, scholars would say there is not one author to that book, there's at least 3. Probably, definitely at least 2, probably 3. And you can tell that because it spans different times. One's worried about Assyria, one's worried about Babylon, and one is coming back from the exile. These are different eras and periods of time, and so different things are going on. Why did they all end up on this one thing called Isaiah? Because scrolls ain't cheap. And in the ancient world, when you had room on a scroll, you would just keep going. And so you had likely 3 different authors, 3 different communities of prophets who contributed over the generations to those texts. Speaking of dates, the oldest parts of the Bible are much older than any of the books in the Bible. Does that make sense? And the oldest parts of the Bible are not prose, it's poetry. It's music, it's song. And so, for example, the oldest probably the oldest part of the Bible is the Song of the Sea in Exodus 15, which Moses' sister Miriam sings after they cross the Red Sea. And that comes from probably the 13th century. And so when you see some other dates I'm going to give you, you're going to be like, oh, wow, that's way older than anything else. Then there's also the Song of Deborah in Judges 5, which is very, very old from maybe the 12th century. Some people say it could be the 8th century. That's kind of a gap. They just can't tell for sure based on some of the language. But those are probably the oldest parts. So if you're ever at a trivia night and the question gets asked, what are the oldest parts of the Bible? I've at least given you that. Maybe you'll get a gift card somewhere. I sort of always assumed when you open a Bible and you go to the table of contents that that's how they were written, right? So Genesis was written first, then Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, and you just go all the way down. But the Bible actually is not in chronological order, and the dates when things were written can kind of be shocking when you hear them. Let me give you an example. The Torah, or it's also called the Pentateuch, which means like the 5 books. These books are made up of different sources. And you can go through and discover this. Like, you discover it very early. How many of you have read Genesis 1 ever? How many of you have read Genesis 2? Did you ever stop and go, wait a minute. This is a creation story, and it's over. And then Genesis 2 starts a new one. How many have you ever read the story of Noah and the flood? Yeah. How many animals went on the flood with Noah? 2 by 2, yes. But not just that. 7 pairs of clean animals and a pair of unclean animals. So which is it? Both are in the Bible. And you can tease out the two stories, and they're very different. One is really concerned with things like sacrifice. The other, not so much concerned with sacrifice. And that tells us something about the people that wrote these texts. And you had an editor who came along for the first 5 books of the Bible and had all these strands of tradition, some from the north of Israel, some from the south in Judah, and some from in between. And you had redactors and scribes, and they brought together these first 5 books. And they needed an editor, is what you'll find out when you read it, because they don't do it very smoothly at times. And sometimes, like in the Noah story, the edges are quite sharp. And when you really pay attention and read that story, which I apparently didn't do until I was in my 20s, you don't realize, oh my gosh, there's very interesting things happening all over the place. That first 5 books did not reach its final form. Now, the sources predate. Did not reach its final form until likely the 5th century. The oldest text, 13th century. What we call the Torah is a 5th century final product, which means Moses, who is said to have authored that, who lived probably in like the 13th, 12th century, Moses couldn't have written that, right? First of all, if he did it, he didn't do a great job of, he told 3 stories at once sometimes. But this is a collection and an editing process. Also, the prophets, which I never read in my entire life until I went to seminary. I knew they were there. We only read them to get predictions for Jesus. We never listened to the critique the prophets made on society. And since then, I have just fallen deeply in love with the prophets, especially the book of Amos. You want to get fired up? Go read the book of Amos. He is not messing with fools. This guy is ready to go. It's my favorite. And the Hebrew Bible breaks things down. The books are in different order. But in the Hebrew Bible, they have the Nevi'im are separated into collections. They're the former prophets, and that's Joshua, Judges, Samuel, and Kings. And you're like, wait a minute, those aren't prophets, but they're in this category called the former prophets. Then you have the latter prophets, Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel. And then you have the book of the 12, which in Christianity gets called the minor prophets because they're so much shorter. You have the major and minor is how Christians often talk about it because they're shorter. The prophets likely reached their final form in the 2nd century BCE. 2nd century. But they were written much later. Like Amos is probably one of the earliest texts we have, the writing prophets. So Amos would have lived, I think, in the 8th century. So his stuff would be older, but there was editing, and that's how we ended up. And then you have the writings section, which is the Ketuvim. It contains everything else. And this collection did not reach final form. You're going to gasp when I tell you this. The year 100 CE. Thank you. Appropriate response, where were the rest of you? After, the writing section of the Hebrew Bible was not complete until roughly 70 years after the life of Jesus. That's just wild to me because the Psalms, for example, were heavily quoted. It was already authoritative and sacred, and yet it wasn't codified until after the time of Jesus. And when we talk about the writings, we're talking about poetic books like Psalms, Job, and Proverbs. We're talking about the 5 scrolls, Ruth, Esther, Ecclesiastes. Do not read that if you're having a bad day. Lamentations, don't read that if you're having a bad day. And Song of Songs, don't read that probably in just public. You also have the history, which is Chronicles and Ezra, Nehemiah. They didn't break those up, by the way. Kings was Kings, Chronicles was Chronicles, Samuel. It's not 1st and 2nd. And then you have an apocalyptic book. Just like the New Testament has Revelation, the Hebrew Scriptures have Daniel, which is not considered to be a prophet, but which is considered to be part of the writing category in the Hebrew Bible. And I give you all of that just to say, when we talk about the Hebrew Bible, we have texts that stretch from the 13th century to the 100s. That is a gap of time. Think about everything that changed in that time. How many of you are just kind of holding on for dear life after everything that's happened in the last decade? 13th century to the year 100 CE. A lot changed. And that change is clear. It comes through in the writing that people do, what they preserve. You have differing perspectives. You see over time, not an evolution of God, but you see over time an evolution of how humans understood God. You see competing ideas of God. You see disagreements. You see Ezra and Nehemiah say, if you're not like us, you're out. And you see the story of Ruth come in and say, but what if, by excluding all the people who are different than us, we lost out on our greatest king, David? Because David's grandmother was a Moabite, and we hate Moabites. So if we exclude the people we hate, we also lose our heroes. There's something powerful about that evolution of understanding of God, one that I would argue is still going on. Now, why do we have this collection of texts? Did somebody sit down one day and go, listen, we need to write a really cool book? More like an anthology or a library. We need to put something out there. That's not how it began. It began to preserve a cultural identity and to help create a people. And I want to explain that. So how many of you heard the phrase, history is written by the winners? That's almost true every time, except in the Hebrew Bible. The Hebrew Bible was not written by the winners. That's kind of what makes it unique in world literature. It wasn't written by the people who had that week that everything went up and to the right. It was written by a group of people who, over the course of their history, had been subject to one empire after another, trying to control them, trying to tell them how to live their lives and what to do, threatening essentially their culture and identity. And so to give you why I think, and others, there's a great book that came out. Jacob Wright, I think, is the author. It's called Why the Bible Began. Highly recommend checking that out. But you've heard of David. You've heard of his son Solomon. They were said to have ruled over a united kingdom, right? You had all these tribes, 12 tribes that under David and Solomon, they were all brought together. In the north, there was Israel, which was the larger, more prosperous, wealthier, more expansive territory. And in the south, there was Judah, who's kind of the younger brother who doesn't have as much, isn't as land rich, or they also didn't have the resources that people would have in the north. And you can kind of see the dividing lines. By the way, have you noticed that in the Hebrew Bible, there's a ton of stories about God favoring the younger over the older? Long after they were gone, they're still arguing about who God likes more. It's sort of like in the end of John when the thing that the beloved disciple wants us to know is that he can run faster than Simon Peter. Like that sort of like, let's preserve this for all time. The younger ones, we win. And so David and Solomon, the text says that they ruled over a united kingdom. I'll just tell you, scholars don't know that ever actually really coalesced in that way. They're not sure there ever was a united kingdom. But for our purposes, we're going to assume the narrative of the text, and we're going to say David and Solomon ruled over a united kingdom. Solomon dies, and his son Rehoboam ended up splitting the kingdom apart because he took some bad advice and engaged in some bad leadership. The people of the north came to him. He was from the south. They came to him and said, your father's labor laws, he used forced labor. It was very painful and difficult for us. If you'll treat us fairly, we'll serve you forever. And he comes back and essentially says, I'm not going to treat you fairly. It's going to get even worse. And so they just say, we're done. And they end up leaving. The north breaks away from the south. They establish their own monarchy, their own worship system. They're not going to the temple in the south. They're hanging out up in the north. And these two kingdoms became rivals. For centuries, at times they would have actual conflict, and occasionally they would collaborate together. But all of that changed in the year 722. In the year 722, Israel was destroyed by Assyria. So that whole blue section we just saw, the Assyrians came in and destroyed them, deported most of them. And have you heard anybody talk about the lost tribes, the 10 lost tribes of Israel? It's the northern kingdom. Because the Assyrians took them, put them elsewhere, brought other people in their land. That's where the Samaritans came from. And essentially you lose these tribes. So this vibrant group of people who were doing all sorts of things, writing literature, living their lives, they essentially are gone. And Judah from the south, who's weaker, doesn't have the same power, doesn't have the same resources, looks at what happens in 722 and says, that's not good. That could very easily be us, because if they keep coming south, we're next. And so there's this concern about what do we do? Well, In 587, a new empire, Babylon, comes knocking, and they defeat Judah, and they exile them. They send them the richest and the best. They left the poor or the sick, or they would leave them there. But they sent the best and the brightest to Babylon to be given a Babylonian education and to become sort of Babylonians in practice. And so they were defeated, just like the North had been. But in the exile, something happened. They realized, we don't want our story to go away like their story went away. And so in exile, far from home, you had scribes who began collecting traditions. And they began trying to tell the story, not of the North and the South, but they realized if we have a shot at survival, we need to tell the story of one people. We need to tell the story of one people who experienced the liberative act of God in the past. As God heard the cry of the enslaved Hebrews in Egypt. We need to tell that story because we want God to do the same thing for us now. Does that make sense? And so what happens? Where did this idea of laws come from? Where do these rituals come from? It comes from a group of people trying to hang on to themselves, to their identity, to their history, and to their culture. And eventually they were allowed to go back to the land by a guy named Cyrus, and they worked to sort of demarcate themselves from the people around them. And it was a brilliant idea that they wrote this stuff down and then collected stuff together because this same people were subject to one empire after another over the years. When we meet the New Testament, we find Israel being oppressed by Rome. But before that, between Babylon and Rome, there's a lot of other empires. And why? Have you ever asked the question, why did all these empires, why is Israel such a big deal? It's a very small piece of land. Why is it such a big deal? I want to show you. Let's put up a map. So Israel's right here in the, what do you notice? It's small. What do you notice here? This is Europe. This is Asia. This is Africa. If you want to run the world, you need that trade route. You need to control, if you're over here in what would have been Aram and you want to control Egypt, well, there's only one way to Egypt, and that's through this. So it wasn't so much like, we don't like Israel, we want to get rid of Israel. It's that piece of land allows us to access the world. And everybody wants to control. Aren't you glad humans aren't doing that kind of thing anymore? We've just evolved so much as a species. And so that's essentially where and why we got the Hebrew Bible, as a response to people wrestling to, especially the Torah, wrestling to preserve their identity, where they'd been, and what their hopes were for the future. Now here's the part, if you've tuned everything else out, I want you to tune back in for just a minute. We're gonna wrap up. Here's a few things I want us to consider. And it has to do with some of the ways we talk about this. And I wanna begin here. The God of the Hebrew Bible is the same God as the New Testament. And they both are a bit of a mixed bag, to be honest. And here's what I mean. People will say the God of the Old Testament is cranky and just kills people and lightning bolts and all of that. And the God of the New Testament, in Jesus, is just so kind and nice. My response to that every time, and it comes up a lot, is I think that there were people in the New Testament who would disagree with that, like Ananias and Sapphira. Have you heard of them? They got killed by God for not giving enough to the church offering. Nice guy. Nice guy. Can you imagine that time of giving the next week? Like just, not gonna be me. People who say the God of the Old Testament is cranky, the God of the New Testament is all benevolent and loving. The book of Revelation slides into the chat and says, excuse me, this God is okay to wreck the world to prove a point. Because what you have in the Bible, and this may be a little bit of a statement, what you have in the Bible is not a picture of God. What you have in the Bible is an understanding of God through human understanding. That's why you see it grow and change, not because God is growing and changing. I think God's quite mature. What you have in the Bible are human interactions and understandings of God that are growing and changing over time. There's this moment in the Torah where it says, God will punish children to the umpteenth generation for their parents' sin. In Ezekiel, God says through the prophet, why do you all say this? That God will punish the children for the parents' sin. I imagine somebody went, because it's in the Bible. And Ezekiel says, no longer will this be said in Israel. Every person will be accountable for their own actions. That's a break with the past and a new understanding of God. A God who's not punishing people generationally, but dealing with people as people and individuals. This idea that the God of the Old Testament was different than the New Testament is not a new idea. It came about from a guy named Marcion. Anybody ever heard of Marcion? Yeah, Marcion decided that the God of the Hebrew Bible was different than the God of Jesus. He rejected the Hebrew Bible, and he was the first person to put out a New Testament canon, which basically, he loved Paul, which basically included an edited version of Luke, 10 letters attributed to Paul, one of which is not even in the canon at all at this point. And so that began, and he was ruled a heresy. That's the bad kind of heresy. Which is the kind of heresy that is essentially trying to just eliminate and exclude an entire group of people and a part of our history. The God of the New Testament is the God of the Old Testament. What has changed is not God's behavior. What has changed is human ability to understand and comprehend God's behavior. Or to say, no, we know that actually we don't think God acts like that anymore. That's what you see happening in the Bible. Second, I firmly believe this. Jesus makes no sense without the Hebrew Scriptures. When I listen to Christians say, we just need to unhitch ourselves from the Old Testament and just be Jesus people. Do you know how often the New Testament quotes the Hebrew Scriptures about Jesus? All the time. Today's the day of Pentecost. In Acts chapter 2, there's a story of when the Spirit came, the birthday of the church. Do you know that story? Luke didn't just write that story. That story is actually a riff on what happened in Exodus when the law was given to Moses at Sinai in Exodus 20. The ascension of Jesus, you know, when he just takes flight, like you do. That's only in Luke, in Acts. And you know where Luke got that? Luke got that from the story of Elijah, as he was taken up to God in the I almost said fiery furnace. That's a different story. The fiery chariot. They're borrowing. And the Hebrew Scriptures are an interpretive clue. Now, the Hebrew Scriptures never talk about Jesus. They just don't. And they don't prophesy Jesus in the way we want them to. But what happened is Jesus' followers had their experience of him that didn't make sense based on what their expectations were. And do you know what they did? They went back to the Bible. They began to reread it, reinterpret it, and reimagine it. And they realized when they read him through Jesus goggles, he's everywhere. You know that story over here? That's about Jesus. You know that story over here? That's about Jesus. And for them, it became about Jesus. When they wanted to interpret Jesus, they took a story from the Hebrew Scriptures and used it as a way to interpret his life and meaning. And we're going to do that. So this year for Advent, it's going to start before Advent. We're going to do a series called Jesus and His Ancestors, where we're going to show how the Hebrew Scriptures use great characters and heroes, or how the New Testament uses great characters and heroes from the Hebrew Bible to interpret Jesus. So Jesus and Moses, Jesus and David, Jesus and Joshua, those kind of, how does that show up throughout the New Testament? It makes no sense without Jesus. And then last, the Hebrew Bible invites us into a story and into a trajectory. I think that's why we really need it. It invites us into a story that Jesus did not see himself as opting out of, a story which his disciples did not see him as being separate from. I think it's interesting in the book of Acts, they keep going to the temple. They keep their practice. They keep engaging in ritual. They never saw themselves as, welcome to our new religion club. They saw themselves as faithful. Now, as this tradition about Jesus spread, it morphs into a new religion. But early on, this was a sect that was part of Judaism. It was a reform movement within the Jewish tradition. It invites us into the story. It invites us into the trajectory. I think about Dr. King's words often, which is the moral arc of the universe is long and it bends toward justice. I think we see that in the Scriptures, both Hebrew Bible and New Testament. I think we see a trajectory as people learn and grow and change their mind and rethink and reimagine. And the technical word here that gets screamed at people, which sounds scary, but it's not, is the word repent, which just means to change your mind. When people yell at me on the internet to repent, I'm like, every day and twice on Sunday. Right? We're being invited to interrogate our faith, to interrogate our doctrines, to interrogate our positions and ask. And so for me, what I see in Jesus leads me to sort of, how do you make those decisions? For me, it is, does it lead to human flourishing or does it not? And if it doesn't lead to human flourishing, if it harms people, if it tells people that there's something fundamentally wrong with them that God can't love, then that is part of the thing that does not make the trajectory with us. It falls off like a bit of space debris. And we keep going because the moral arc of the universe is long and it bends towards justice. And if we don't have the Hebrew scriptures, we don't know where we've been. And in my experience, if you don't know where you've been, it becomes really hard to know where you're going. And I think that we have large misunderstandings of Jesus because we have not understood the tradition and trajectory that formed his life. It's very likely there was no bound copy. It was just a bunch of scrolls. It's very unlikely Jesus maybe never got his hands on a scroll, but he seems to have known the scripture. Because this is one of those things that was just part of the fabric of life, learning where you've been to know where you're going. You ever done any of that family genealogy stuff where you try to figure out where you came from? You ever wish you didn't? You ever just... I found a couple of things. But here's what's important. I can look back at where my family history was at one point, and I can look at the trajectory, and I can see where hopefully my kids, and if I have grandkids and great-grandkids will be, and there's a trajectory toward human flourishing. And we can't do anything about what people did before us, but we can change the narrative and change the story and alter the trajectory in this moment. We can believe better things about God. We can believe better things about Jesus. We can cultivate a faith that seeks to help every one of God's children flourish. And I think that's our work in this moment. The number of conversations I've had pretty much every week this year have been people who are like, I'm scared right now. Things are hard right now. You take what's going on societally, politically, economically, people are afraid. And not irrationally so. Right? When the military gets mobilized against citizens, that's terrifying. What do we do in this moment? Because I think this moment asks something of us. It's asking us to rise to meet it with an understanding, a lens for the Christian tradition that actually leaves the world better than we found it. My hope is not that whenever my time as a pastor is over and I hang that up, my hope is not that people will come and say, you really helped us become really good, doctrinally sound sticklers for what's right. My hope is, I don't know what I believe about that, but I do know that human flourishing is the goal. And I do know that we're trying to leave the world better. And we're trying to make sure every single person gets this good news. You are God's beloved exactly as you are. We've all got growing to do. We've all got changing, all of that. But there's not a single thing God needs you to do to love you. There's not a single thing that God needs you to do that will make you more acceptable than you are in this moment. That is how radically beautiful the idea of grace is. It is yours. Sometimes I like to think of God as Oprah on the Favorite Things episode. You get some grace. You get some grace. You get some grace. What I do think is that rising to meet this moment is grounded in all the moments we've been in through before. And if we want to do that and leave behind a healthier Christian tradition, then part of that rising to meet the moment is understanding where our tradition began and the lives and people who had experiences of God that led them to create these traditions and these stories. And the better we know them, the better they inform us and transform us and set us on the right path. Are you with me? Let's pray. God, we are grateful that our spiritual ancestors' stories have been recorded for us, that their questions, their doubts, their bad days, their celebrations, all of it. That what we are given in the scriptures is not a set of rose-colored glasses through which to see the world, but we are given the good, the bad, and the ugly because that's what life is like. And that's what being human is like. So give us the wisdom to treasure these words, to challenge these words, to creatively engage these words. May they help us know Jesus better, where he came from, the tradition that gave birth to him. May they help us understand ourselves better. And may they help us launch into the world to rise to meet the moments that are in front of us. That's our prayer in gratitude in Jesus' name. And everybody said,
Amen. Wow, that was beautiful. Holy moly, I just learned so much. Thank you all so much for trying something new with us today. It's been amazing to hear so many beautiful voices, all singing as one. This is a beautiful tune. It's called Rise Up, so if y'all know, definitely sing along. You're broken down. Gonna start with that one again. There we go. You're broken down and tired of living life on a merry-go-round, and you can't fight the fighter, but I see it in you, so we're gonna walk it out and move mountains, yeah. We're gonna walk it out and move mountains. And I'll rise up, rise like the day. You'll rise up, I'll rise unafraid. I'll rise up, and I'll do it 1,000 times again. Amen. Yeah. And I'll rise up high like the waves. I'll rise up in spite of the ache. I'll rise up, and I'll do it 1,000 times again. For you, for you, for you, for you. And the silence isn't quiet, and it feels like it's getting hard to breathe. And I know you feel like dying, but I promise you we'll take the world to its feet and move mountains. We'll take the world to its feet and move mountains. Here we go. And I'll rise up, rise like the day. I'll rise up, rise unafraid. I'll rise up, and I'll do it 1,000 times again.
Oh, I'll rise up high like the waves. I'll rise up in spite of the ache. I'll rise up, and I'll do it 1,000 times again.
For you, for you, for you, for you. Rise up high like the waves, so rise up spite of the ache, I'll rise up, and I'll do it 1,000
You want to sing that again?
times
Sing I'll rise up.
And I'll rise up, rise like the wave, I'll rise up. In spite of the ache, I'll rise up, and I'll do it 1,000.
Oh, beautiful. So beautiful. Thank you so much for being with us today. Enjoy Pride Month. We'll see you back here next week. You want to leave them with some All We Need?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
1, 2, 3, 4. All you need is love. Sing. All we need is love. All we need is love.
We love y'all. Have a good one.
All we need is love. All we need is love. All we need is love.
All we need is love. All we need is love. All we need is love. Yes. All we need is love. All we need is love. Love is all we need. Yes, it is. How deep is your love? Love. How deep is your love? I really mean to learn. 'Cause we live in a world that's breaking us down, and they all should let us be. We belong to you and me.
It's your
All we
love.
need,
Oh, love. All we need is love.
all we need is love.
love.
Yes, it is all.